respond.
Just very briefly, Senator, I agree with the Inspector General about higher education. I think we do, when we recruit, Stacy told me there's 22% of our current cadet applicants that have a college education. I also know that we're attempting to provide college education to our correctional officers. I agree with the Inspector General that if we could do something in that regard to encourage staff to get a higher education, it makes good sense across the board. As far as the peer intervention training, I aspire to have an organization that takes care of itself. I want a department where a sergeant or an officer with another officer will stop them before they do something wrong. So I couldn't agree more with him in that regard. I wish I understood the body scan he was talking about so I could relax sometimes because it's a pretty busy job. But we are looking into that type of training. Since I mentioned, I sent some staff to try to give us some feedback and understand it. We're doing some stress management training at High Desert this week. So we're very open to that type of training and giving the tools to manage that very toxic environment. And as to the cameras, I agree with him as well. I think the cameras are there as much to make sure that inmate allegations are not founded or the truth as it is to be a watchdog over staff. I think that the inmate population occasionally misstates information, and if we had a better way of capturing that, I think it would actually protect our staff. So I think the 4 points that the Inspector General made were all very good ones.
Great. So are there comments or questions from members of the committee? I'd really appreciate all of your very detailed responses, because I think what we're interested in is what can we really do that is going to make life better for everybody in this system. And I just want to note that everybody hates it when their guys break the rules and sort of disgrace the whole profession. I think the legislature understands it, police officers understand it, and I'm sure correctional officers understand it as well, because we know it makes all our jobs harder in the future. I'm also interested in, I think it's the sergeants that are the first line after somebody comes in as a CO, and how we prepare them, because they must be the ones that would do a lot of the peer intervention. Senator Bell had a bill last year for police officers requiring 15 hours of mental health training, how to interact with people with mental health issues, and also for the training sergeants in the field of police work. So I wonder, you know, maybe Ms. Lopez, could you comment on what are we going to do for that first line of defense, if you will? Because another thing I've learned in talking to chiefs of corrections in other states and former chiefs of correction who seem to be sometimes a little more exuberant in their forthcoming comments than people currently in charge of the system. They say it's in every prison all over the country. Forget what you learn in that academy. This is how we do it here. And that it's a major, to get to the other place, which is remember what you learned, and there's going to be more that's going to help you, is probably good. But, so what do we do for the sergeants?
Well, I'm hoping since we sent out over 5,500 newbies in the last, 2.5, almost 3 years, that message is decreasing. So, with that, because we hear that too, forget about what you learned at the academy. This is how it really works. But a lot of, a lot of our older correctional staff are retiring with that mindset, and we're sending a lot of new folks out. So I'm hoping that will change. With regards to the sergeants, so Secretary Kernan mentioned that we provide a 40-hour sergeants academy. We started those back up in February 2014. We haven't been able to get to as many of the sergeants that are on the list for this academy due to our focus was ramping up the academy again for filling those 7,000 vacancies. But we are working on a plan to really enhance the training. We do have a leadership and ethics component to the Sergeants Academy, and also it would include, like you're mentioning, some peer support, but that's something that we need to look at as we move forward. Our goal really has been just to get people into the academy and get them trained, because they are supposed to have gone to the Sergeants Academy 6 months from their appointment date. So we definitely are not meeting that at this time. So our goal is to look at the curricula even further, and we did revise it before we rolled out in 2014. But again, with some limited resources, we weren't able to do as much as we had hoped by this year. But we are going to be looking further at that, Senator Hancock, to see what we can do to help those. Because I agree, the first line supervisor should be getting that training and even further enhanced, because we can, again, do all of this with the correctional officers, but who are they going to look to once they get to the prison? It's going to be their sergeants, lieutenants, captains.
Right, right. How does the department determine the substance of the basic academy?
So our office, the Peace Officer Selection and Employee Development, which is responsible for departmental training, works with our Division of Adult Institutions. We work with our mental health folks. We work with Division of Rehabilitative Programs. Depending on what the subject matter is for the academy, we talk to different stakeholders. We identify subject matter experts in those areas so they can work with our staff on developing the curricula. We also, before we roll anything out, before we roll any training out, we conduct a pilot of the training, and we invite several custody staff and non-custody staff to come and sit through the training and critique it and give us feedback on what works and what doesn't work. So it's not that we develop it in a vacuum, within training and we don't talk to anybody. It's definitely a collaboration with different programs within the department, ensuring that whatever the subject matter is, we have those subject matter experts in the room helping us and develop it.
How do you measure the effectiveness of the training? Do you have, what data do you use, in other words, to just figure out if the training is adequate?
Well, we haven't really identified how, with regards to, I'll just focus on the Sergeants Academy, but we haven't really looked at that specifically, any data-driven information. I'm thinking, certain things that happen in the prisons, if there's use of force incidents that are, reduced, or if there's things that are happening at the prison, but we don't, in training, we're not tracking that, but the institutions may track some of this data, but I'm just not aware of that.
I think a direct answer is that we just simply do not have the capacity at this point to, once that training is delivered, identify with our staff the metrics and do the same kind of data-driven analysis that we've talked to you in many of our other inmate programs. I don't think that it exists.
It's really interesting. As some of you know, since I come from education, the parallels between what prisons and schools hits me all the time. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was no data to tell whether a school was successful or not. It turns out that what you measure becomes what's valued. It does change behavior. It seems to me that we may be ripe, and when we hear from the National Institute of Corrections, they can tell us if anybody's doing it. But we need ways to measure whether what we do works, because it's the only way to do the mid-course correction that is so very important. I wonder, Ms. Lopez, if you could just briefly describe the training audit that was conducted by Sac State last year and the results of the audit, and whether you think that it was an accurate assessment.
Oh, absolutely. In 2014, we identified a report that was done by the Corrections Standards Authority prior to the academy closing down in 2010. So when the academy was closed, pretty much the report developed by CSA, which had oversight of the training at that time, it just pretty much sat on a shelf because we were closed. So we identified Sac State to come in and help us review what the Correction Standards Authority had identified with regards to the knowledge, skills, and abilities for a correctional officer within a 16-week training academy. And so they started the process in early, I believe it was February of 2015. At that time, we didn't know we were going to be transitioning to a 12-week academy, and we were not aware that the Commission on Peace Officer Selections and Training was coming back as well, which is known as CPOST, who had oversight prior to the Correction Standards Authority. So when Sac State started the process, we were going to use it as a baseline to see where we were, because we were still conducting the 16-week academy, and basically we had our own oversight, and we were following still old CSA guidelines. The report came out, and as you know, the percentages were relatively low as far as our curriculum meeting the KSAs that were identified by Correction Standards Authority. So, but when the report was developed, or when the report was finalized, we had already transitioned to a 12-week academy, and again, the report was based on a 16-week academy. So some of the things that were identified in the report were basically not in, it was really not a basis for our academy anymore. So some things kind of just went away from that report because of the fact that we were transitioned to a different curricula, and we had reduced some hours, we had reduced some classes and all that. So also CPOS had returned as our oversight. So it was really just a matter of the layout of the land had changed from, January 2015 to where we are today. But there were definitely some findings that the department is looking at and reviewing the curricula and seeing where we can make some changes, because there was definitely information that will be helpful as we move forward.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from members of the committee? Senator Bell, and then probably in the interest of time, we need to move on to our last two panels.
I'm sorry I was unable to start the meeting, but I had to give a speech on mental health, okay, to a large group of business leaders. But since I am the chairman of the Select Committee on Mental Health, and when we did the two bills, SB 11 and SB 29, which were for the post training for police officers, it was really looked at in addition to what was good for the community relations in terms of people with mental health issues, to have the officers available for that kind of thing. It also included disabilities, things like autism, different types of disabilities that people have, as well as the subject generic mental health issues. Since I have looked at this preparation support, it just based on the number of daily contacts with somebody with a mental health issue in our corrections facilities, it seems like that the training needs to be boosted up in your training module for the corrections officers training program. What are the plans for increasing training for mental health, and would it require a discussion with the employees' organizations to accomplish that? How would you go about increasing the training on mental health and substance abuse issues?
I think how I'd answer that is that the mental health training that's provided to staff is court-approved training through our Coleman consent decree, and deviations from that would require consultation with the special master and his experts. I think I'd also go on to say that in all my discussions with CCPOA, their position has been very open to whatever training that we might be able to provide. Ms. Lopes mentioned that we had not, C-Post was not available till last year. We just created that, and for me, I just on kind of a base level to have correctional staff that are engaged in the process of developing standards makes us a much stronger system. And that's not without growing pains, but I'm confident that having the correctional officers in the room. So I hope I answered your question. I think it's going to be any kind of change to our mental health curriculum would have to be driven by the court special master.
Could you do legislation? Because I would consider doing that if next year, if we need to put adequate training in our correctional facilities. The special master has not dwelled fully, in my opinion, on mental health because they sort of left out substance abuse issues, as you know. And I think that's a major flaw in what they've been working on. They've left out substance abuse. And I think they ought to explore that. I think we, not the special master maybe, but we, the state, ought to explore the issue of training more fully because I think it's definitely, looking at this, definitely needed to be boosted up for our staff there. And I think it would serve the state well if we had more training. It would less legal problems, less all those kinds of things. It would better treatment, better staff knowledge. I think it's all positive. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could say, I think at some point we'll probably want to break down more of what goes on literally in the training. I noticed that I think use of the baton went from 40 hours to 28 hours. I'd at some point be very interested in knowing what that training looks like, what the communication training looks like, because that could include some mental health related things. To me, the mental health 4 hours always seemed to be how to avoid a lawsuit, as opposed to understanding that you may be interacting with people with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, learning disability issues, developmental disability issues. How do you tell who's who and what are the ways of coping with that? And who are the subject matter experts? And how far afield do we go so that we give our correctional officers a really broad training? So I think that is all of it very useful scrutiny for us. I just want to thank you all, because the more we drill down, and thank the OIG for your very, very concrete suggestions, which I gather has been discussed with Secretary Kernan. So let's see where we can go with those to make some of them reach fruition. I do want to call up Robert Brown from the National Institute of Corrections, and then we'll go to our fourth panel, which is Chuck Alexander from the Correctional Peace Officers Association, and Michael Miner, who is the director of the Division of Juvenile Justice. But Mr. Brown, welcome to the committee. And we are very interested in what you can tell us, number one, about what NIC can do for us, or maybe you should start with just what the best practices are and how your organization, which I believe is part of the Department of Justice.